African authors. What should we read? What is relevant? The relevance is are South African books. Why would you want to buy anything else? Yes, we like all those other big shots overseas, but are they relevant to South Africa? I say no. Sometimes they are. I say no. I'd like to showcase the authors that write 6 books, not one. Yes, one, but those on the shelves. And Dougie came to me and we had a great conversation. I said to him, how accessible are you as a motivational speaker? You know, DiMartini charges 50,000 Rand for one event. I can't afford 50,000 Rand, I'm sorry, to go and see DiMartini, and I would rather see Douglas Kruger than DiMartini. No offense to DiMartini. Lavina, thank you for being here tonight. So I said to Douglas, well, let's start like we did with Jacques Vedeman with the Business Book Club. And you can speak to Jacques here about this. We're having Richard Mulholland, who wrote Legicide, on the 4th of July. Business Book Club is going to be awesome, off the charts of the book, as all of the events are. I said, Douglas, let's start something with you. You've got 6 books. 6. Let's break the rules. You're talking about breaking rules. What rules are you breaking? You're writing the books, but are you actually walking in those books? Are you actually walking the talk? Yes, it's great to stand up in front of, and no offense to you, my darling heart, because we did have this conversation. Make it accessible to other people that can't come and see you. I mean, when you stood up at Bronwyn's launch, I'm not a speaker, I speak from the heart. And he stood up there with this voice. You know, he's got that sexy voice, you know, ladies and gentlemen. And he commands you in. And I thought, wow. Toastmasters, Happy Days eventually have come to the party with me. They approached me 2 years ago but never followed through. Douglas is now taking that step. And let's break the rules. You break those rules for yourself. And when you're breaking the rules for yourself to make it accessible for all of us, that is where your books are going to sound. It is for me all about the books. Yes, you're going to be spoiled tonight hearing him talk, but you're here to buy the books. And for me that is important. So thank you, Douglas, for coming on board with me to educate me. For me it's important. Pearl, thank you so much for being here tonight, darling. Another author, Paul Siegel, who is running our indie author networking events as well. For me it's empowering. All of the books empower me, and for me that's important for me, to make the best person that I can possibly be. And for that I thank the authors for the education that they've given me, not in any educational institution. And not being a natural speaker, I really want to grab Doug and say, okay, this is where I can learn from. This is where I can feel comfortable, because this is not my comfort zone at all. So, without any further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I really thank you for being here tonight. I hope you're going to be at the next one. Think of a funky name that we can give this. I think it's imperative that we make it attractive to everybody. Mr. Douglas Kruger.
Deborah, thank you so much for that. You do my voice better than I do. Ladies and gentlemen, good evening and welcome to a night of strategic rule breaking.
Yay!
Yeah, absolutely. Deborah, you have become over a very short period of time the expert, the icon, and the go-to person for authors and book launches, and I think that's absolutely fantastic. Sincerely, thank you for the work that you do for authors. Yeah. Well, folks, I'm keenly aware that many of the faces here tonight are connected with me on social media, and there's a part of the back of my mind that's mildly concerned that you're more interested in the ongoing baby saga than necessarily hearing about the new book. And a lot of people came up the stairs this evening and said, you know, is Mikey here? Is Michael around? And Michael is our new 4-month-old, and I'm afraid he couldn't make it tonight due to a prior engagement. You see, it is a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock. And on a Wednesday night at 7 o'clock, it is bottle bath and bed time. very much like a Tuesday night or a Thursday night at 7 o'clock. But thank you so much for your well wishes and for asking about him. I had at least one friend walk up the stairs and give me a new little baby outfit emblazoned with Batman. I've never had that happen at a business event before, so Corin, thank you very much for that. And I'll be passing it straight on. We have been enjoying the new guy immensely. He's 4 months old now, and he was just about 4 kilograms when he was born. Big baby. But you know, when you stir with a big spoon. So tonight we are talking about strategic rule breaking and the advantage that it can give to you as an innovator, as an entrepreneur, and as a business owner. Now, I'd like you to imagine it's a cold winter's night and the wind is blowing outside. You don't mind too much because you've got the fire going, you've got some logs blazing away, and the dogs are snoring away at your feet. You poured yourself something interesting to drink, and you settle in for your favorite TV show. Now, the show itself has become globally renowned, and there's a phrase that has become iconic. It is so famous that even though it's only 3 words long, if I give you the first word, I'm pretty confident you'll know what the next 2 are. So as you settle in to watch your favorite show, complete the sentence for me if you can. You hear in these dulcet British tones, the character says, winter
is coming.
Is coming. It's Game of Thrones. Game of Thrones has become a worldwide runaway phenomenon success story. And earlier this year, my wife and I started binge watching it. We started right from the beginning and worked our way all the way up to the latest episode. And good advice for newcomers to the Game of Thrones series is don't get too emotionally attached to any of the characters. Now, my wife and I are not particularly keen on violence on TV, and this one is an extraordinarily violent show, and it catches you by surprise. What tends to happen is in the last 30 seconds, maybe 1 minute of the show, everything is going well for the character that you've been rooting for through this entire season. 30 seconds to go to the end of the show, and you're thinking he's going to make it, and just before the end titles, your favorite character dies gruesomely. And we sit there going, oh my goodness, why do we watch this show? Let's put on the next one. And you have to ask yourself, why on earth would you do that? You know, why is the world reacting so strongly to the show that shocks us so badly? Part of the answer is simply this. There is no formula to Game of Thrones. You don't see it coming. We've become so accustomed to the way things are done and to the formulas that we expect that something like that throws us, and it's delightful. There is something wonderful about being tricked and not seeing it coming. And that's what we're talking about tonight. It's the surprise factor inherent in breaking the rules. And you can do it in just about anything. So tonight we're talking about how to strategically break rules to your own benefit and to the advantage of your business. And there are a number of things that we will talk about. But some of the rules that we break are ours to tinker with, and some are not. So there are some danger zones, some things that we are not allowed to play with. And whenever I talk about breaking the rules, the initial gut reaction to that is people say, well, that sounds like anarchy. In some cases, they are not your rules, and you're not allowed to break them. But in certain strategic cases, they do belong to you, and you can do things that work in your favor. About 3 weeks ago, in the Wall Street Journal, there was an article where they did something a little unusual. Usually the Wall Street Journal is particularly kind to the Obama administration, but in this one they weren't. They tabulated the costs of the rules and regulations introduced by the Obama administration over the course of their time in power. And they came up with some eye-watering statistics. In 2016 alone, it cost US businesses $1.9 trillion to comply with federal regulations. Or in other words, companies in the United States of America had to pay $1.9 trillion before they could earn a penny. There is always a cost associated with rules. Now, in some cases, we are allowed to disband the rules, and in other cases, of course, we can't. If you try and fiddle with the rules and regulations passed down by the state, chances are you're going to find yourself in a surprise, impromptu, and very promising new relationship with your new cellmate, Bubba. So you can't always tinker with the rules, but in certain cases, you can. A little while ago, I was driving down the road in Johannesburg, listening to Talk Radio 702, and a voiceover came on the radio and said, don't you hate the fact that you have to pay for your plane tickets in full before you can apply for a visa to go overseas? Now, has that ever happened to you? Yeah? Then the voiceover went on to say, at Virgin Atlantic Airlines, we are the only airline in Southern Africa that will fully refund your ticket if you don't get your visa. I thought that's absolutely brilliant. Because when we think about innovation, we tend to think about the cost associated with it. We tend to think, well, you've got to be a Google or an Apple or a Virgin Atlantic or a Mercedes-Benz to be able to innovate effectively. And then we think, well, you've got to have the infrastructure as well. But these guys did something brilliant. They simply asked, what's awful about dealing with us? And you would think that they would look within their aeroplanes and within the time that you spend with them in order to find ways to innovate. But they didn't. They went one step prior to that. And they said, what do our customers go through when interacting with us? And they found a norm and a rule that they were able to break. And if, like myself, you do travel overseas, you hear an advert like that, you have no option but to consider going with them, because it becomes the logical choice. They have innovated in a way that costs them absolutely nothing. And very often, if we're clever about it, we can do exactly the same thing. But it requires that we do something brave. We have to ask the question, what's awful about dealing with us? Now, by a quick show of hands here, who owns or runs or manages their own business? Quick show of hands around. Yeah. That's a brave and difficult question to ask. The last thing we want to know is what's awful about us. We want the positive feedback. We want the glowing reviews. But sometimes the negatives are pure gold. That's where the innovation opportunity lies. And in fact, sometimes, if you're not willing to ask that question, you hand the opportunity to innovate to your competitors. Arguably the worst example of that one of all time happened just after World War II. So the various forces have decided to call it quits before somebody really gets hurt, and they go back home to their various countries. And there's a guy who's been working for the Italian army. Now, he was an engineer. He was designing tanks for the army. Gets back home and he decides that he's going to use the skill that he's learned to launch his own company. And he does. He starts building tractors in the south of Italy. And over time, he becomes fairly prosperous. His tractors start to sell first around his region, then around the nation, and then increasingly all over the continent. And he becomes fairly prosperous quite quickly. Now, pop quiz. If you're an Italian and you become rich overnight, what's the first thing you've got to rush out and buy? You are the weakest link. Ferrari has it. Okay, Ferrari. Now, folks, for you or I, the day arrives where we can buy our first Ferrari. I mean, that's something pretty special. What is it now? It's 3.5 million rand, 3.5 seconds, 0 to 100. But for an Italian, it's on a whole different level. Because if you're Italian, Ferrari is not just a car. It's a part of your heritage. It's in your bloodstream. It's in the marrow of your bones. Getting a Ferrari is like buying a rolling combination of mama and opera and pasta, all rolled into one. So he gets his Ferrari and he gets it out onto the road. True story. Pulls away from the first set of lights, first gear, second gear. He tries to go into third. And there's something awkward about the clutch and third gear. Nevertheless, he gets past it into fourth, slows back down again, fourth gear, third gear. Now, there's definitely something wrong here. So being a mechanically minded man, he gets home and he disassembles his Ferrari down to its nuts and bolts and spreads it out across his workshop floor, as you do with your new Ferrari. And he rebuilds the entire car from the ground up and comes up with a better solution to their clutch problem. He gets it out onto the road. First gear, second gear, third gear, it's a dream. From fourth, back down into third, second, it's absolutely perfect. So what does he do? He goes to Ferrari and tries to give them this technology for free. He arrives at the front door, unannounced, and explains why he's there, and the lady at the front desk hears him out, disappears upstairs, comes back down, crestfallen, and says, "I'm sorry, sir, they're not even willing to meet with you." They dismiss him out of hand. And as he walks down the steps and across the parking lot back to his car, the anger starts to mount and build. Now, what if you've ever had that experience where the adrenaline starts making your hands shake? And then, in fact, it goes one step worse than that. You get that coppery taste in your mouth, like you're chewing on pennies. By the time he reached his car, he was so livid that he made a vow to himself that that day he would start his own sports car company. And that very afternoon, that is exactly what Dr. Lamborghini did. True story. If you go and have a look at the Lamborghini website, it is their founding story. They are proud of it. And what happened there is that by refusing to hear what was awful about them, Ferrari created their own worst nightmare. They gave the opportunity to innovate to someone else. Hearing what's wrong with us and what's wrong with our business is pure gold if you are looking to innovate. Now there's a trick to this one as well, because you can't think about this one like a business owner. So let me run you through how this works. Tonight, imagine that you are the head of a high-end chain of hotels. So just for this evening, bear with me, you're Donald Trump. Now, to find out what's wrong with your room, if you're thinking like a business owner, here's what you're likely to do. You'll walk into your room and you'll have your little board in front of you with all the little tick boxes. And you'll look at your clipboard and you'll compare it to the room around you, and you'll see that the curtains are beautifully drawn, so that gets a little tick on your board. And you see that the TV is on standby the way that it's supposed to be, so that gets a little tick in a box as well. The bed is made, the carpets have been beautifully vacuumed, the television is on standby, and the hairdryer is in the little cupboard exactly where it's supposed to be. Tick, 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 everything's perfect, and you walk out having learned nothing about your room. Now, if you're looking for what's wrong with your room and ways to innovate, you're going to do this slightly differently. You have to live through the experience like one of your customers. And that's a whole different ballgame. So you walk into the room and you're about to spend the night. You close the curtains, you get into bed, and that's when you realize that the curtains don't quite meet in the middle. There's a little 1-inch gap, and it lets in the city light. So there's a highly scientific solution to this one. What you do is you take a chair and you pull one curtain over the other and you prop it shut with the chair. Have you ever done this? Yeah? You get back into bed and you close your eyes. Now you're going to rest your weary head. And the television is off, but that's when you realize that there's a little blinking red standby light. And even with your eyes closed, it looks like the Rio Carnival going by on the far side of your eyelids. There's a very clever scientific way to solve this one. You take one of your discarded socks, and you stand up on the bed, and you get the sock over the little standby light. Problem solved. But now, of course, you're all riled up and you can't get to sleep. So as you get back into bed, you check on social media, you send a good night message to your wife, your girlfriend, don't get those two mixed up. And you're about to plug your phone in, but that's when you realize that there is no convenient power outlet next to your bed. You've got to plug it in on the far side of the room. And that means that when your alarm goes off in the morning, you're going to have to do a dramatic dash across the room to switch it off. And if you're a very fancy high-end hotel manager, you might be wearing silk pajamas when you do that. If you're me, you're going to be in your underwear. And you'll be hoping that the curtains haven't opened in the middle of the night, revealing your dramatic flight to the city outside. But we're not done, because even though the hairdryer is exactly where it should be, it's tethered to the wall, and there is no convenient mirror next to it. To use the hairdryer, you've got to do an awkward dance and try and see yourself in the mirror on the far side of the room. Has that ever happened to you?
Yes.
Yes. So, by living through the experience of the thing, you start to see what's awful about the room. And here's what that all boils down to. You're doing something very different to other businesses. You are asking a different question. Because if you ask a different question, you're going to get a different answer. And folks, tonight I'll share with you a number of ways to break rules and innovate. But I'll tell you right up front, that's the master key to it all. Innovation really boils down to this one thing. This is your cheat sheet. Ask a different question, and you will get a different answer. So tonight I'll share with you some clever strategic questions to ask in order to break the rules and innovate within your own business. I first came across this concept, and I'm actually quite glad to have my younger sister here today. She can vouch for this because she lived through it as well. We grew up in a nice neighborhood. We grew up in the Woutervlieten Park area, which is fairly well off in the whole trip. But Lauren and I and our family were essentially the odd ones out. We were not desperately impoverished, but we weren't quite on the same financial level as the people around us. And it's little things that give you away. You arrive outside these nice schools that you go to, and the other parents will waft up in the BMW or waft up in the Mercedes-Benz and open the door and expensive air escapes out onto the pavement. And then, the mom leans over and says, "Johnny, close the door, you're letting the poverty in." For us, it was nothing like that. Has anyone here seen the Spud movies? Yeah? You know the dad in the Spud movies? That's my dad. Well, yeah, okay? Right down to the red beard and the personality, the whole trip. Full of crazy ideas and just very off-center, different to everyone else. So, the other kids, again, were being picked up in the big cars. We had it slightly different. You could hear when my dad was arriving from 2-3 blocks away, because you'd hear the squeaky brakes and the engine of this old Peugeot 504 that the local kids called Puff the Magic Persian. And it would inevitably break down right in front of the school every single afternoon. And my dad had no problem with getting out and calling the 2 biggest, coolest kids and saying, "Hey guys, come help me push." But now, when you are the odd ones out financially, you've got to find ways to entertain yourself. Ways that don't cost money. Chances are, lol, that's why you and I exist in the first place. But once you've had the kids, you've then got to find ways to entertain them. And when I was growing up, the kids in our area were playing with things like the Xboxes and, some of them had quad bikes. There was just no way we could afford that sort of thing. So my dad walks out into the backyard, and he scratches his head and sort of looks around to see what he has to work with. And he does something interesting. He asks a different question. Now, the obvious question would be, how can I afford the Xbox or the quad bike for the kids to play with? A different question, and this is zooming back, is how do I entertain the family? So my dad notices there's only really one defining feature in our backyard. From next door, there's this massive tree going up some 40-50 feet into the air. And at about 30-35 feet up, there's a big branch hanging over to our side of the yard. My dad has this epiphany. He thinks, rope swing. So what he does is he gets a small rock, and he puts the rock into a cloth sack. And then he ties the sack shut, and he stands beneath this branch, and he tries to hurl the rock to get it over the branch. After he regained consciousness, he had created what became a legendary rope swing in our neighborhood. And there were some key differences. When most of us think about rope swings, we think about, say, an old peach tree and half a foot of chain, maybe an old bicycle tire, and the kids would swing back and forth for 5 minutes, get bored, and forget about it. Ours was nothing like that. You see, for starters, you didn't sit on it. You hung onto handlebars at the end. And what you would do is you would run the entire length of the yard. And right toward the end of the yard, your feet would start to come out from under you, and you would swing over the roof of the house on this side. Then you would touch down, run across the yard, and swing over the telephone wires on that side. We had surprisingly few fatalities. And most of those were kids nobody missed anyway, so it wasn't a big deal. But the fascinating thing is that the rope swing outperformed the Xboxes and the quad bikes. The wealthier kids abandoned their toys to come and play on the rope swing. Ask a different question and you get a different answer. If you look at the world in different ways, you can innovate in ways that don't cost you money. So, if those are some of the reasons why it is worth your while to break rules, let's ask what's in it for you. Why should you actually bother? The first reason is that rules come with an associated cost. Every single rule has its own associated cost, and they tend to slow things down. Second reason it's worth your while is that changes can make your compliance irrelevant. Just a few years ago, if you ran a chain of video rental stores, and you ran them to optimized perfection, you obeyed every rule, you obeyed every law. It wouldn't matter today how well you ran that store when things like box office, DSTV, and Netflix come along, because they have rendered your excellence irrelevant. You can follow every rule and still disappear off the edge of a financial cliff. Third reason it's worth your while to break rules. Novel innovation can unlock hidden budgets. Think about your business. Are you a commodity, or is there something so wonderful about you? Some narrative, some storytelling angle that is so interesting that people have to use you. You become what Joe Calloway calls a category of one. There is nothing else like you. When you are a commodity, they shop for you on price. But when you are something outstanding, excellent, and innovative, they find ways to afford you. Now that's a game changer for many of our business models. Number 4, buzz makes brands iconic. You want people talking about your business. And the interesting thing is, when we start out building our brand and our business, our heart's desire is to fit into our industry. Coming from a place of insecurity, we look at the businesses like us and we go, I want to be like that. It's possibly one of the worst things that we can do. In a best case scenario, we want to stand out and be completely unique. 5th reason it's worth your while, and this is quite an altruistic one. Innovation is a display of caring. What don't customers like about your industry? Where are the difficulties? What are the hurdles, the obstacles, the rules that get in their way? If you can find a way to innovate around that, exactly as Virgin Airlines did, you are showing that you are out-caring your competition. That is incredibly valuable. And perhaps the final reason, agility rules the world. You know, there are some remarkable success stories about organizations that are more agile than the ones that came before them, the old dinosaurs, and how they're taking over the world these days. A small startup animation company called Pixar goes and outperforms Disney year after year after year. They do it so well that they end up taking over the leadership of Disney. Then you've got SpaceX, a small startup rule-breaking company that outperforms NASA and then receives funding from NASA. And the same entrepreneur starts up a little car company, a little upstart called Tesla, that obeys absolutely none of the rules, takes on the mighty S-Class Mercedes-Benz and trounces it in the World Car of the Year competition. Rule breakers all around the world are doing something agile, innovative, and different. They're starting up these, what we call 10x organizations, which are either 10 times more effective than the old dinosaurs that came before, or 10 times cheaper, or 10 times faster, or a combination of all of the above. Elon Musk famously managed to get a rocket out into space 10 times faster and 10 times cheaper than NASA was ever able to do it. And in fact, studying NASA gives us some interesting insights into why rules get in our way. So those are some of the reasons why it's worth your while to break the rules. Why don't we? What stops us? What gets in the way? I'd like to share with you at least 5 reasons why we are reluctant to reduce or relax our own rules. And the first one is what I like to call inherited thinking. Inherited thinking. Picture in your mind's eye an Industrial Revolution era factory. Big block of a building. Now this was daily life outside of that factory. There's something that you might find very familiar about this. In the morning, the foreman blows the whistle and everyone lines up outside in neat lines. In the morning, you drop your kids off at school. The teacher rings the bell and everyone lines up outside in neat lines. The foreman then guides them to their workspace where they sit down in neat lines and they produce for a set number of hours. The foreman goes to the front of the room and oversees their work. The teacher takes the kids and sits them down in neat lines, goes to the front of the room, and for a set number of hours, they produce. The foreman blows the whistle. The teacher rings the bell. The workers take their lunchboxes, your kids take their lunchboxes, and they head outside. Foreman blows the whistle, teacher rings the bell, they come back in their neat lines, and they begin to produce again. At the end of the working day, foreman blows the whistle, teacher rings the bell, and they can all head off home to come back tomorrow and do it all over again. And we look at that and we say, well, come on. That's just the way a school works. Folks, no it isn't. Schools work that way because they are designed to create the right type of employee for an Industrial Revolution era factory. That's the thinking. We look at that and we say, well, that's just the way it functions. No, it isn't. It had a specific purpose at a point in time. And what's happened is the thinking gets handed down through the generations, and the point, the purpose, the strategy, the thinking becomes invisible to the next generation along. We look at it and we go, well, that's just the way it always has been. So that's the first reason we're reluctant to tinker with rules. The thinking behind it becomes invisible to us. The second reason, is exactly that. It's the way it has always been done. Folks, if you follow things like Harvard Business Review, any of the business publications these days, you'll see increasingly the publication of studies that say that really disruptive innovation almost never comes from within an industry. In other words, taxi drivers don't invent Uber. Banks don't invent PayPal. Why not? Why not? Well, the reason is taxi drivers think like taxi drivers, and they observe the behavior of other taxi drivers, much to our detriment in South Africa. And banks think like banks. And banks, what they like to do when they think of new things to do, they take all the complexity they have and they add more complexity on top of it, because they are thinking like a bank. It took an outsider to come along and invent something like a PayPal. The inventor of PayPal wasn't interested in the complexity of banking, they were interested in the simplicity of banking. The way it has always been done can be incredibly problematic for us. It's hard to think around it. Let me run you through a little thought experiment. So, congratulations to you. You are now the president of a nation. But you are the president of a nation with an interesting problem. This is a water-stressed, drought-stricken region. So something like Namibia or an Egypt or an Israel. And your task is to feed the highest number of people using the smallest amount of water, the least water possible. Quick survey around the room, and don't worry about the wrong answer, it's a very strange answer. What crop would you grow to get the most food for the least water? What do you think? Yep? Peanuts. Yep, never heard that one before, I love it. Peanuts.
Insects.
Insects. Would you eat them? Suppose if you're hungry, yes, absolutely, good source of protein. Nice abstract answer. Any other thoughts? What do you reckon? What crop would you grow? Folks, the reality is I have already misled you by asking the wrong question. My phraseology was this: what crop would you grow to get the most food for the least water? Ask a different question, you're going to get a different answer. And the question you need to ask is not what crop should we grow, because then you go around in smaller and smaller circles trying to refine the way things have always been done. Instead, what you want to do is ask the bigger question: how do you get the most food for the least water? And the answer to that one, surprisingly, and it's bizarre and counterintuitive, but it's true, is fish. Fish. To get the most food for the least water, you want to farm fish. Sounds ridiculous, but look it up, it is absolutely true. It's like the joke about the guy who owns a hardware store. He gets his sales team together and he says, guys, what do we sell? And they specialize in 16-inch drill bits. The whole team says, 16-inch drill bits. And he says, no, we sell 16-inch holes in walls. And if you can think of a better, cheaper, faster way to do that, that's rule breaking and that's innovation. So, what do you sell? We had a lot of hands raised when I asked who owns or runs a business or a brand. What do you sell today, but what do you actually sell? What do they genuinely get out of your service? If you weren't selling the drill bit, you were selling the hole in the wall. Looking at it that way is the beginning, the germinating seed of disruptive innovation. Because then you stop saying, how do I refine the 16-inch drill bit? You start saying, how else can we get the end result that they're after? That's the way disruptive innovators think. So, competing with the noise outside there, those are two reasons why we tend not to break rules. The third reason is what I like to call efficiency Nazis and the art of fine-tuning the machine. I call them efficiency Nazis, and perhaps it's a bit of a disingenuous term, but in every organization you have two camps that are essentially at war with each other. On the one hand, you have the very technical people who like to optimize systems. And on the other side of things, you've got the splashy, colorful, creative thinkers who are not at all interested in systems and refinement. They're interested in big, crazy, loud, splashy new ideas. And in every organization, these two groups are essentially at war with one another. The reality is we actually need both of them. And this is a leadership issue. We need to know how to manage and to control their different but complementary goals. In a best-case scenario, here's what we need. We need the crazy ideas people, the radical innovators, to come up with the big idea. Then we hand it over to the process people who make it better and better and better, who optimize it, who make it more efficient, more spectacular, whatever the case might be, right up until the ideas people have the next idea and then we dump the way it was always done. That's the hard part, is letting go of that. Because the optimizers don't want to let go. Best case scenario, we go idea, optimize, 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 drop, new idea. Optimize, 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 drop, new idea. The leadership component is getting the optimizers to let go of the old idea because they become emotionally attached to it. Take Kodak, for example. Kodak decided that film was always going to be the big thing in the world of photography. Digital comes along and they could not let go of the old thing in order to try out the new. Folks, how are we for sound? Are you still able to follow here? Yeah, I do apologize for that. We are competing with a bit of noise next door.
Just hold it a little bit closer.
A bit closer,
yeah.
Let's disrupt them.
Let's shout louder and make some splashy noises.
Go.
The fourth reason that we tend to be reluctant to break rules is our own silos can fight back. Take the example of Sony. Sony was uniquely positioned to do what Apple is doing today, but they missed the boat on this one. So, Sony had the big names like Michael Jackson in the world of music. They had also invented the Sony Walkman, so they not only owned the top music in the world, but they were also seen as the innovators in how to get that music out. And this is the part that's absolutely mind-blowing, one of their divisions was already experimenting with online downloadable music before Apple got anywhere near it. But the other divisions, the ones that sold CDs and records and cassettes, took one look at that division and said, those guys are going to put us out of business. And they started a war with their own online internal musical division. And to the great detriment of Sony, they won. And they shut down Sony's possibility of going online. Now, their division prospered for a very short time, and Sony suffered in the long run. So our own divisions and our own silos can actually fight back against us. Number 5, and this is perhaps the most important one, and the one that we'll really look at, is simply the wrong culture. I wonder, there are probably a few people in this room who specifically remember, you've seen the movie, the more recent one, but you might remember the actual event in 1970 when Apollo 13 was launched out into space. This is one of the most famous events in our spacefaring history. And of course it's the one from which we have that famous and iconic phrase that James Lavelle uttered, which of course is, Houston, we have a problem. And boy did they have a problem. There they are, hurtling toward the moon at over 2,000 miles an hour out in the blackness of space. And one of their oxygen tanks explodes. Then the next one fails. Then everything that you can possibly imagine going wrong goes wrong, one thing after the other. I mean, they're in the middle of the worst of the stress and they lose their electricity, they lose their lighting, they lose their heating. It's like there you are under the worst pressure you've ever had, and the Rushford municipality steps in and cuts off your water and lights in outer space. And what they did, and famously, and this is true, they spoke to the people back on Earth and conveyed their problems one by one. And at the time, NASA was a learning, experimenting, pioneering, and innovating culture. And you've possibly seen the movie now with Tom Hanks, you know how this one goes. As every problem came up, they compared notes with the people back on Earth, and they solved the problems one by one over the stretch all the way out into space. And they got them safely back home. 1970. Now, we reached the turn of the century. 2003. And the launch of Columbia. Of course, this one is much more recent. You probably remember this one. And something fascinating has happened with the internal culture at NASA. They have gone from being a learning, debating, pioneering, innovating organization to a rigid, rule-bound hierarchy. Now, folks, you would think, intuitively, you would think that obeying the rules would be safer. In this particular case, it actually wasn't. There are safer approaches than simply obeying rigid rules. Here's why. So, Columbia launches, and off it goes out into space, and some of the scientists are looking at this, and they see it venting foam, and they say, that looks dangerous to us. And they go and report on this vented foam. And their superiors go to the rule books and they say, we have seen vented foam before. This is a known quantity. The rule books can accommodate for it, the bureaucracy can handle it, it's a known entity. And the scientists, using human intelligence, try and push back and they say, this is more foam than we have ever seen before. But the rules won, and the hierarchy prevailed. And you know how that story ended. Quite aside from billions of dollars wasted, 5 men and 2 women lost their lives, 2003, really to a rigid bureaucracy. Sometimes the rules are not as safe as debate. So, various organizations have studied the culture at NASA in order to do something different, to become more agile and not to fall prey to the same thing. Tesla has done so, SpaceX has done so, Pixar does so, and strangely enough, the Israeli Defense Force studies this thing in great depth. Has anyone here ever been to Israel? Anyone? Yeah? A couple of hands around the room. I went once when I was, I must have been about 18 years old. And I knew nothing about Israel or the region or the politics or anything at the time. I was there for a few days as a tourist. And I can remember being 18 years old and sitting down on the bus. And this beautiful young woman sits down on the bus next to me, also about 18 years of age. And I decided not to try to say hello to her when I saw her casually sling her machine gun over her shoulder. She was a member of the Israeli Defense Force. And this is one of the most effective defense forces on Earth, despite the fact that it is also one of the smallest. And, you know, regardless of how you look at the politics, let's look at the effectiveness of the organization itself. You look at a military force like that, and you would think, well, they must be rigidly rule-bound and incredibly hierarchical. And it turns out that the exact opposite is the case. A great many studies have been done into the culture within the IDF, and this idea keeps coming out time after time after time. The only tradition within the IDF is to be traditionless. In other words, they can't afford to be predictable. They can't afford to have their patterns be understood or comprehended. They need to be a surprise all the time. As a result of that, their agility is phenomenal. And they do something quite fascinating in order to avoid the kind of disasters that NASA faced. They don't manage themselves by rules, they do something completely different. And what they do is simply imaginative debate. Imaginative debate way outperforms rules within any organization. Now let's look at how that works, because we're going to switch from the reasons why people are hesitant to tinker with rules to some strategic ways in which you can, and we'll revisit the IDF as we go along. So, let's get practical. How can you break rules within your organization, and what can you tinker with in order to innovate? Here's the first different question that you need to ask. Question number 1, which rules are people already trying to break? So this one is very easy. Which rules are people already trying to break? We don't have law enforcement in this room, and I'll be the first one to raise my hand here, in shame. Who here has ever done an illegal U-turn? Okay. Right. Most of the people in the room. Was it useful at the time? Yeah. In South Africa, you are not allowed to do a U-turn. You are breaking the law, you are doing something wrong and immoral. In places like California, they make provision for it. Here's how it works. You have the same concrete island up the center of the road. But 10 feet prior to the line, the concrete ends. And you have some arrows indicating the fact that here you can make a legal U-turn. They've discovered that people sometimes want to turn around, and they've made provision for it. Not in South Africa. In South Africa, we punish people for it. Who here has ever been to the McDonald's at the top of Rivonia Road in Sandton? Okay, you know where I'm going with this one. Presumably, 50% of people coming out of that McDonald's will want to go left, and 50% will want to go right. But you can't go right because there's a concrete island in the center of the road. However, the concrete island ends about 10 feet that way. So if you sneak out like this, you can do a quick U-turn and go right. And the cops know that, so they sit right there and they trap and fine people for the immoral, reprehensible act of wanting to turn right. Which rules are people already trying to break? Sometimes, by looking at the behavior that already exists, you can find ways to tinker with your own business systems. And we have to reserve judgment on this one because it's hard. Your staff, your team, try and take a shortcut. They try and break your rules and do something in a way that you don't approve of. What if you suspended judgment? What if you took emotion out of it for just a while and asked, is there any strategic benefit in allowing them to break this rule? Can we enable the U-turn? Better still, which rules are your customers trying to break? The rules that your customers are trying to break are indicators to you of the barriers to purchase that you are putting in their way. They're your rules. Can you break them? Can you make this swifter or easier for your clients? You know, the philosophy is really this. If you are, say, an architect and you've laid out an office park, there are one of two ways in which you can lay out the pathways. You can either prescribe what the pathways are from day one and put them where you want people to walk. Or you can wait a couple of weeks and see where they naturally walk, and then build your pathways on top of that. It's the path of least resistance. People teach you the way that they want to behave through the shortcuts that they carry out. So, question number one, which rules are they trying to break? Question number two is, ask the question, can we become a learning culture? If you hear the story about NASA and something about that bothers you, and you think, you know, we're run by bureaucracy and rules and systems, and there is just no allowance for humanity, spontaneity, or innovation, what can you do about that? Well, it starts with the way that you view your own business structure. There are many analogies that do the rounds when we talk about business. You know, we might say, business is like playing a game of football. Good business is like playing a game of chess. Chess is a particularly problematic one. Off the top of your head, 5 reasons why running a business successfully is nothing like a game of chess. What do you think? Why isn't it like a game of chess? Yep.
Yeah, one move at a time.
You have? One move at a time. Okay, so it's a staccato rhythm. The business world is nothing like that. Sometimes when you break a rule, you find a lever and it gives you exponential results. It's not one move at a time. Why else is your business not like a game of chess?
Only one competitor.
Only one?
Opponent.
Okay, only one opponent. And it becomes binary. So it's either I win or you win. Which is to say, you must lose in order for me to win. And that's quite profound. You know, in the world of business, it doesn't always work that way. Elon Musk gave away the technology underpinning his Tesla cars for free to his competitors. Why on earth would you do a crazy thing like that? Because unlike chess, business is not binary. It's not I win, you lose. What Elon Musk was doing there is trying to create the infrastructure that would grow the entire world of these electric vehicles. Any other reasons why your business is not like a game of chess? Yeah?
Like board doesn't move.
The board doesn't move. Okay. I think you're touching on what is probably the most profound thing of all. Chess is played according to a fixed, set, and determined internal set of rules. So if you obey the rules, you can win. You won't be halfway through a game of chess about to take out your competitor when all of a sudden a kid with an app in Tokyo takes out the relevance of your business and steals your king. It doesn't work that way in a game of chess. In business though, outside forces affect the integrity of what you do, and other people can have exponential results by breaking the rules. And again, in chess, you cannot break the rules. You have to play a game of chess according to its exact internal language. But in business, there is no downside to breaking the rules, provided you're not breaking a legal law. So, what we want to do then is combine a couple of ideas. We want to start teaching 2 things. The one is what we call commander's intent. And this one again comes from the IDF. Commander's intent is something they teach Navy SEALs, they teach the IDF soldiers, and it basically goes like this. You have to understand what I'm trying to achieve. Now that sounds incredibly basic. Why does that matter? Well, let's take a military example for this one. So say, for instance, that you're trying to get your convoy through a dangerous canyon, and there's a sniper up on the hillside who's taking pot shots at you as you go along. If you simply give the order to one of your guys, go and take out that sniper, you have not expressed the commander's intent. The commander's intent is get us safely through the canyon. Now, why would that matter? I mean, that seems obvious. So here's what happens. Your guy goes running off into the mountainside, and 5 things go wrong. He can't find the sniper. That's his first problem. Second one, maybe his gun jams. Third one, he's trying to find the sniper, but he's being fired on by unexpected forces, and so on and so forth. Now, if your guy is simply following the letter of the law, the specific, explicit instruction that he was given, it is pass or fail. It's binary. He either takes out the sniper, or he fails in his mission. But if he understands commander's intent, he can act laterally. So what he can do is he can say, all right, I can't take out the sniper, but what I can do is I can cause a commotion in a different canyon, and I can draw their fire toward that while my convoy gets safely by. So it may sound like a very subtle shift, but it makes the world of difference. There's this wonderful visual image that sometimes does the round. You've probably seen the memes on Facebook. A group of people playing a game of football with boxes on their heads. They can't see what they're doing. Most businesses work this way. It's you saying to your player, run forward 3 steps and kick, because the ball is right there. And if nothing changes, that's a very good idea. But if anything changes in the business scenario, by the time that he gets there, the world may have altered, and that instruction may be rendered pointless. So understanding commander's intent is one part of the formula. The second part of the formula is what they call Rosh Gadol. Anyone who speaks Hebrew here know what that stands for, Rosh Gadol. Yeah? No? Yeah. The words translate into big head. And in English, if you accuse someone of having a big head, you're saying that they are vain or conceited or full of themselves. However, in Hebrew, it has a whole different context. It has a whole different meaning. What that says is the ability to interpret broadly. So it's the ability to understand what your commander wants and find a way to make that happen. So when these guys study the culture at NASA, here's what they do. They say we cannot have fixed and rigid rules. It is unsafe. We have to have imaginative debate. And very similar to the Navy SEALs in the United States, what they do is at the end of every day, regardless of what has happened, and regardless of what's happening in the world around them, they get together and they hold a town hall meeting. And there they debate the living daylights out of everything. And they do it every single day. What went right? What went wrong? Who made a good decision? Who made a bad one? What worked? What was dangerous? And perhaps the most important part of this one is the honesty and the candor. Because people at the lowest levels challenge the decisions of people at the highest levels. And there are no rigid rules. They say that their honest debate and creative debate outperforms rules. Now folks, within your business, what if you had the courage to do that? To say, rather than having a set of rules, everything is open to debate. It's a terrifying idea. What if you tried it? One of the best books I've ever read on this one is about how they do it at Pixar. And a great book to read if you get the chance. It's called Creativity, Inc. The cover of the book has got Buzz Lightyear standing in dramatic silhouette, and he's conducting an orchestra. And they talk about in great depth about how they create the culture at Pixar that outperformed Disney. And it's exactly the same thing. They debate the living daylights out of everything, and nothing is a rigid rule. So, question number 3. Ask, which walls must go? Once again, Elon Musk. If you ever get the chance to go and visit the SpaceX buildings in California, Northern California, you walk in the front office, you can see the back walls. Why? Because there are no divisions. This whole thing is open plan and open space. Because one of the little tricks that Elon Musk has figured out is that if you get everyone working together from the beginning to the end of a technical process, the opportunities for innovation are exponentially increased. When you have blind silos fighting against one another, the things that they do in this silo may make perfect sense to them, but no sense to the business as a whole. So what he says is basically, if you're a rocket manufacturer, manufacturers in the rocket manufacturing department, all you'll ever get is incrementally better rockets. If you keep your toaster manufacturers in the toaster manufacturing department, all you'll ever get is incrementally better toasters. But if you let your rocket makers and your toaster makers meet and mingle, you might get toast-powered rockets, or rocket-powered toasters, or pregnant employees. You never know which way this one is going to go. Which walls must go in your organization? And number 4, ask yourself, where has this problem been solved before? Folks, I'd like you to think about the worst problem that you're dealing with in your business right now. What's the thing that keeps you awake? 3 a.m., you come back to consciousness and it goes round and round in your mind. What is it that you're dealing with? That problem has been solved somewhere before. What if you went looking for that solution and copied and pasted? One of the best examples I've ever seen of this one, it's a true story as well. It was a hospital in the United States, and they had an unusually high mortality rate. And they had to really dig into this one because they were going to get themselves shut down if they didn't solve it. And they did a study to find out what was going wrong with their building, with their hospital. They discovered this. It was the handover period between the ambulance and the ER team. If you were in the ambulance coming to the hospital, chances are you'd be fine. If you made it into the emergency room, chances are you'd be fine. But there was a 3-minute handover period in between where people were dying in droves. And they said, all right, we've got to get that period way, way down. 3 minutes is too long. And at first they did the obvious thing. They went and looked at how other hospitals were solving the problem. And by doing that, they managed to get their own time down to 2.5 minutes. So a bit of an improvement, but not a great one. Then one young maverick had this crazy idea. And I'm sure you've had this experience too. You're sitting in a meeting and you have that left field crazy idea that you kind of half blurt out as a joke. She said, you know what we should do? We should go to a Formula 1 Grand Prix racing event and see how they service the cars so quickly. Now this person's supervisor just happened to spot some gold in that. And they said, okay, let's do it. And you've seen this on TV. I mean, the car comes in at 700 miles an hour, skids to a stop, they change all 4 tires, refuel it, feed the guy a pizza, give him a haircut, and off he goes in under 3 seconds. And by going and studying how they did that, they were able to get their own handover time down to 7.5 seconds. Folks, the problem that's keeping you awake now has been solved somewhere before. What if, instead of observing how your competitors are solving this problem, you went for exponential results by going and observing the same principle outside of your industry? They're your rules, and you can break them. The final thought I'd like to leave you with, and this goes to disruptive innovation, is to give yourself what we call the Starship Enterprise test, which is simply to ask, how would this work on the Starship Enterprise? So, what's your favorite restaurant? What's your favorite meal? At the moment, what you have to do to go and enjoy that meal is make a booking, get into your car, drive through traffic, get to the venue, find the parking, go inside, sit down, order the meal. How does that work on the Starship Enterprise? Kirk says, computer, rump and red wine, and instantly there it is. And what that does is it idealizes the end result. It says what is the quickest path to the desired end result. Now folks, think about this one from the perspective of your customers and your clientele. What would be the Starship Enterprise version of the thing that you do? Forget the current steps. Forget the current delivery mechanisms. If they were trying to achieve this on the Starship Enterprise, how would that look and how would it go? Sometimes by tinkering with our own rules, we find exponentially faster ways of getting to the value. When we do it cleverly, we can disrupt an entire industry and recreate the buzz that makes us iconic. If you think in different patterns, you get different results. Ask a different question, and you get a different answer. Some rules are sacrosanct, but some are not. Some of the norms and the ways of doing things that get handed down through the generations are only there because they have momentum. They served a point and they had value at a certain point in time. Maybe the value is gone. Perhaps the point has disappeared. What if you were the one to spot that opportunity and become the next disruptor in your industry? What if you were the one to change the way things have always been done? After all, they're your rules. You can break them. Thanks for your time. Folks, does anyone have any questions or anything that you may want to chat about or ask anything down those lines? You're more than welcome. Otherwise, we can kind of break it up into a social chat and I'll wish you a safe drive home as you go. But any questions, anything that you might want to ask?
Are you going to sign books?
Am I going to sign books? Yes, absolutely. Yeah. Cool. Fantastic. If you have any other questions or anything, please come and chat with me afterwards. And once again, thank you so much for your time. Thank you.
Sorry, I don't know about anybody else, but I'm just kind of absorbing it all, so that's why I've got no questions.